Well, welcome to the St. Genevieve Museum Learning Center. We thank you for coming tonight and coming out in the weather, which has cleared off just in time for your presentation, Frank. A couple of housekeeping notes. Restroom is just down the hall 15 feet. Hang a left, you're right there. If you have cell phones on, please silence them for the presentation. How many of you have memberships to the museum? So quite a few of you. If you do not have a museum membership, now would be a great time to get one because tonight's admission can be taken off of your price of a membership. So the membership, it has some great benefits. The discounts in the gift shop down there, unlimited visits to our museum, as well as free admission to all of our speaker presentations like this evening. So there are some benefits to being a member, so we hope you consider that. We are supported strictly by memberships, by admissions, by donations, and much like tonight's program, sponsored by very good sponsors. Tonight's is sponsored by Chip Marzuko and Marzuko Electric, so we certainly thank Marzuko's for sponsoring. And if any of you have an idea for a presentation that you think the community might be interested in, please let us know about it, and we'll track it down. Maybe you know someone yourself who would be interested in doing the program, or if you'd like to sponsor a program, we certainly want to track that down as well. We have a few things coming up that we'd like to let you know about. September 7th. Really something for the kids, I think. Join us as a baby dino hatches down in our egg room. We call it the extravaganza room, all kinds of things there. But we have a incubator that has dinosaur eggs in there, and one is going to hatch. You didn't know they were real, did you? Well, they are. So anyway, we invite all the youngsters to guess its name. The baby dino. We have a day of fun planned, so hang out with us from like 10 to 3 or so. We've got free arts and crafts. Scooter Burgers will be here from 11 to 1. Kona Ice will be here at 1. And I think Sarah's Ice Cream is going to show up with some treats too, maybe. We'll have a special showing in this room of The Land Before Time. That will be at 1:30. And you can stop into the Learning Center at any time and make your guess, or bring your little dino fans in to make their guess. And whoever guesses the dino's name will win a nice random drawing basket for their guess. So that'll be kind of fun. And why don't you yell out some names for the dino? What do you think? Got any names? Arnold? Carl. Nice name for a dino. Could be. Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Ask for a friend.
Okay. Well, you'll be amazed at the name. Let's just put it that way. Tonight's tonight's program will kick off really a string of great speaker presentations, and I think you'll really like these things coming up. So again, if you're not a member, you get to be a member. On September 18th, the Great Loop with Mike and Jody Uding. They'll be telling us about their year-long nautical journey. So that'll be fascinating. They spent a year on a boat. Could you do that? We're going to talk all about that, so that'll be fun. That's on the 18th. On October 2nd, we'll have a speaker presentation from Stonehands, who is an artist, a master crafter of instruments, and flint knapper who focuses on native-style art and culture. He's been giving demonstrations and lectures throughout Missouri for over 20 years, and he resides right here in St. Genevieve. On October 29th, we'll welcome David Fielder, the author of The Enemy Among Us. How many have read that book? It's a great book, isn't it? He'll be here to talk about the Weingarten POW camp. And by the way, Fred Darrow, our gallery extraordinaire maker, he's working on a new World War II and Weingarten POW display. So that'll be ready in the next few weeks. And speaking of World War II, on November 13th, Maurice Whitley will have a fascinating presentation on the Red Tails, known as the Tuskegee Airmen. They were a group of volunteer African-American military pilots who fought in World War II, so that'll be kind of interesting. But tonight, we welcome Frank and Annette Rolfe, who have a great presentation on the Old Academy, one of the most famous buildings in St. Genevieve, that really has, gosh, such a rich history to it. And yes, it was the first school west of the Mississippi, but there is so much more than that. And we're going to find out all about it. So let's turn it over to Frank Rolfe, who's going to tell us the story, and again, brought to you by Marzuko Electric. How about a hand?
All right, thank you. Now, there are many historic structures in St. Genevieve, and in fact, here in the audience are the owners of many of them. But tonight I'm just going to talk about one of them, known as the St. Genevieve Academy. So if you went to school here, you probably have seen it 1,000 times. You may have left your mark on it. We have hundreds of initials carved in many parts of the house. When we moved here, in fact, a guy came up and said, because there was an old safe in the house, that he had the key to it, that he had locked it and then stolen the key back when he was 10, in I don't know what year, 1950 or something. And he said, "Do you want the key back?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be fantastic." And he couldn't find it. So, a lot of stories with the school and the house. And I was asked to explain why we just call it the Academy, because it's known, it has basically 3 or 4 different names. One name that's out there is the Old Louisiana Academy. Then another name you see is the Louisiana Academy. And then you see the St. Genevieve Academy, and sometimes just the Academy. And I use the Academy for short because I don't want to offend anybody. As far as how the names came to be, and some of the older postcards from, there's a postcard from 1903 or 4, and it says the Old Louisiana Academy. So that must look good on the postcard. And then when the town put the plaque on the house during the bicentennial, it's the Louisiana Academy. But then in the WPA guide, it becomes the St. Genevieve Academy, which is roughly the same time as the bicentennial. And on Wikipedia, it is only the St. Genevieve Academy. So I don't know how the name juxtaposed, but I admit that the Louisiana Academy sounds sexier than the St. Genevieve Academy. So my wife Annette, who's right up here at the front, we bought the Academy back in 2005, and I'm here tonight to tell you the story, and I'm going to do it to keep it interesting in 10 different stories of Missouri history and how they all intertwine back to the house. And then when I'm done, we'll have a Q&A with whatever questions you have. So we're going to start off with the land it sits on, which is known as Academy Hill. And Academy Hill is the highest point in St. Genevieve County. It doesn't look possible to me, because when I look at the house and I look back up the street, it looks like that's higher than me, but somehow visually I'm off by a foot or something. So it is in fact the highest point in the county. And the land that it sits on at one time belonged to John Price, who's the same guy that owned what is now the Brick, which is the oldest brick structure maybe in America, west of Mississippi. And before that, the land was owned by Louis Champagne, who I don't know enough about, but Bobby will probably tell you his entire life story, but I don't know it. But before that, I was told by Booker Rucker, who was, what was he, the head of Missouri something? State Parks. That he thought that that land at one time was an Indian observation post, because apparently the Osage Indians were great about monitoring travel up and down the river. And so they liked to have people who would act kind of as their communication system. And then they would send signals to each other based on what was going up and down the river. It sounds reasonable to me. So I imagine that the land had many other uses before a school ever got built on it. And from the giant trees that used to be in front of the house, in fact, when you see this picture, this is the house here. So that's here. This is the town, and the house is right out here. So right out here, you don't see it in that drawing, because it all been cut down by the time the drawing was made. There used to be some gigantic trees, because St. John back then, no one deforested back before there were people, and so they had some giant trees on the property. And from those giant trees, you had the first 2 court-ordered hangings in America west of the Mississippi. The first of which was in 1811, where they hung a guy named Peter Johnson for murder. And they chose that location because they felt that you could then see him hung from the river and from the town to discourage similar behavior. I guess that's what that was all about. And also, because of the Academy Hill proximity to the river, it was used, or the Academy was used as a signaling moment to turn the ship if you were going down the river. It's not in any Mark Twain stories, unlike the house with the blue windows down in Chester or something. But it's my understanding that somewhere out there is references to it. The strange limestone that it's made of, that blue limestone, apparently somewhat reflective in the moonlight, so it probably did make for a good navigational tool if you were going down the river. But the reason that the Academy sits on this hill today was because when they decided to build a school, which we'll go talk about in a minute, they thought there was that if the higher you were, the less disease you had. They didn't know why it was. Of course, we know today it was mosquitoes near the river and much greater chance of disease than if you were way up high. So the town thought when they wanted to build the school, they needed to pick some place that was as high as they could get. And that, as you can see in the drawing, that was the place to be if you want to get really high. Today, from the house, when we go out on the upper porch and look out, we can see all the way down Highway 32 to the community center and beyond, and we can see all the way down 61, we can see the lime plant, and so it still has crazy far visibility. I can even see the river when it's at flood stage from there, even though the river has moved course enormously, and then of course we can look right out onto Chester and the area across the river. But the remote location that you see in the drawing, that also became a horrible liability for it as a school. So it was a blessing as far as disease, I guess, but it was a curse in other areas. So now let's move on to, there we go, the first school. So around 1807, the residents of St. Genevieve thought it would be a good idea to build a school that could teach the kids how to speak both French and English, since with the Louisiana Purchase, now this has become America, but everyone here spoke French at the time for the most part. So this was a concept that was hugely supported by a guy named Father Maxwell, who was a Catholic priest and got a lot of things done in town. And so he thought it was a great idea. So he just grabbed with that idea, he ran with it. And he wanted the school to be public, open to anybody, although it was only for boys, no girls allowed, from what I've read. But it was to allow everyone, including poor children, and it identified even Native Americans. So it was an all-inclusive concept. And he put together a 21-member board of directors to help try and make this concept of his into a reality. And so they passed the hat and they raised $1,904 in cash and $814 in materials, and that's their budget. That's what they were going to build the school out of, was a little less than $2,000 in cash and a little less than $1,000 in materials. But that was kind of how the school went from the beginning. It always had financial problems. So they did not have a very good and strong financial governance mechanism. So the school was constantly going broke, pretty much during its entire early existence. And so the town, since they didn't have enough money to really make the thing work, they went to the U.S. government and they said, hey, could y'all chip in some money for the school? And they were told, no, we have no money because we're broke. But Thomas Jefferson gave them a charter and said he thought it was a great idea. So they decided they would just go ahead and go forward with it, even though on very limited funds. And hopefully, kind of like Field of Dreams, if you built it, it would all work out. That was kind of the plan. But the one part missing from building the house is with less than $2,000 of cash and about $800, mostly of lead, is how you would build the crazy thing. Because they wanted something that would be permanent, that wasn't liable to be burned down. So they realized there's a whole big pile of stone sitting over at Fort Deschartres in Illinois. So if you haven't been to Fort Deschartres, you go down to Main Street, hang a left, go to where it dead ends, get on the ferry, cross over, and you will ultimately end at the Prairie du Roche, and you will be over at Fort Deschartres. And Fort Deschartres was built in 1751. It's well worth seeing. If you've not been there, you need to definitely go. And the French abandoned it in 1772, so it was no longer relevant to them apparently after only 20 years, so they gave up on it. And the stone is quarried, it's blue limestone, and you can see where it's quarried, because if you go to the fort and you look towards the little mountainy looking thing, you'll see the mine shaft holes right there. So they just quarried the stone there and then brought it over and built the fort out of it. And it's really nice stone. They did a great job. The French were really good at cutting stone. And so the plan was that they would basically steal the stone and bring it over here. But then the question is, how do you get it? Because the stone pieces weigh a ton. So how is this possible? Well, they realized you got a river, and the river's flowing down towards us. So they went over there, and they built rafts on that side out of logs, put the stone on the logs, and then floated over and crash landed them, and then hauled them up the hill. That's at least what we think happened. I wasn't there, you weren't there, we don't know. It's kind of like the Egyptians, but we think that's how the stone got from the fort here. Not a helicopter, probably, nothing like that. And then the problem was when you had all that stone, then what would you do with the stone? Because no one knew how to build anything out of stone except for one guy named William Shannon. And William Shannon just happened to be an Irishman who was here in St. Genevieve at the time. So he basically built the academy from memory of the last Irish manor house he built. That's why it has such an odd appearance for the Midwest, is because you have an Irish guy building a stone house from memory with really no real plans. And so they decided to make the thing 25 feet wide by 50 feet long. And that was basically, he was told, just go build this thing out of stone and do it your own way. And he was a really good stonemason. So despite the New Madrid earthquakes, and I'm sure many a tornado and other items, the thing still stands today. And in fact, there are records on the school, and there's notes in there during the New Madrid earthquakes that, amazingly, it doesn't have any damage. So I think maybe the stone could just jiggle enough that it would jiggle, but that none of the stone would break off and fall down. Now, the walls of the academy, if you go up there, they're about 18 inches thick of the solid blue limestone. So, it could repel most anything, a gun, probably not a cannon, but it's pretty hardy. And you'll notice the way it's built is it's just a 4 walls of stone with a sill on each floor, and then from the sills they have the beams that run across and the floors on top. So you literally could burn the place down, and you couldn't burn it down. You could burn out all the floors and the beams. You could put the beams back in the floors and be right back in operation. So the design was kind of brilliant because it was very, very, very well engineered by Shannon. And it's interesting to note that when they tried to reconstruct this thing during the WPA, when the government was trying to find projects for people who'd been laid off during the Depression, they couldn't find the stone. They could only find enough stone just to do that front piece of it. And that's because not only was a lot of it over at our house, but in many people's houses. And when you go around town, you can see houses that look like they probably have the stone that was taken from Fort Richard. And you can even see it in many people, just their walkways and the stairs into their houses and where it came from. So the building was completed in about 1808. But dendrochronology that the state of Missouri did when they owned it for a while, they found for some reason, they only did the first floor in 1808. They didn't actually put the floor in on the second floor until 1809. So when the school opened, it apparently opened with just the lower level with 2 classrooms, and then I guess just a bunch of beams and with later development. Again, they were always hard for money, so that's probably what happened is they needed to raise a little bit more money to put the second floor in. Then the problem is, once they have this thing built, is who's going to teach it? Because it's in a remote location, it's kind of an odd idea, so where will they get the teachers? So the first teacher at the academy was a guy named Daniel Berry, and he only lasted 1 year, and we have no record of him at all. So I don't know what happened to Daniel Berry. I don't think he went on to do anything much different. I'm not sure why he left after only 1 year, but the teacher who was famous at the academy in the early days was this guy named Man Butler. And Man Butler was hired to teach. This is what he agreed to in his contract with the school. He would teach English, French, Latin, Greek, arithmetic, surveying, logic, metaphysics, geography, history, and philosophy. It's not much to ask, right? Back in 1812, no, it's not a big deal. The number of students that he agreed to teach all these many subjects, he was limited to 45. So it was a 45-person school teaching all this wild stuff. And in addition to that, he had to maintain the building, he had to cook lunch for all of the kids, and build a fire every day to give it heat during the winter for the kids. So it was a pretty awful job, right, for the amount that he was paid. So that was not really something you want to hang on to. So he wasn't there that long. He was there for only 2 years. And before he became teacher at the academy, he was, he had got a medical degree, and then he got a law degree. So there's something more into that story. Like he must have murdered someone somewhere and ended up here. Because why in the world, if you were a doctor and a lawyer, would you end up teaching under those circumstances at a little school in St. John to 45 kids? So the whole thing seems to be a little bit odd. But at any rate, he taught there for 2 years, and then he went and changed over to the Jefferson Seminary in Kentucky, which then became the University of Louisville. And from there, he became a law professor at Transylvania University in Kentucky. And the interesting tie-in is that General Rozier, who we haven't come to yet, he was a lawyer, and he got his law degree from Transylvania University. But at that time, he had no connection to the house. So it's possible that his teacher was Man Butler, and so oddly, they would both end up at the same house. Is there any connection? I have no idea, but it's possible. Because when Roger graduated, Butler was still teaching there. So it was a possibility they had class together. Now, Butler wrote the History of Kentucky, which is still considered one of the best history books on Kentucky. You can still buy it. I have a copy of it. You can buy it on Amazon or Aid Books in any number of places. And it's called The History of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. That's the official title. And he also wrote a second book called Valley of the Ohio, which was published right before he died. So he didn't author just one, but two different books. And he died in the historic train derailment in 1855 at the Gasconade Bridge, known as the Gasconade Bridge disaster. And what had happened was Thomas Hart Benton, not the artist, but the statesman, who also comes into the story in the Academy in a minute, he had been pushing for, he was very involved in politics. He wanted a railroad that would go west out of St. Louis. So they started this railroad, and when they got done, they were so proud of it, they had all kinds of local dignitaries ride the inaugural ride of the railroad to the west. Well, they had a 760-foot expansion bridge over the Gasconade River that collapsed and killed 43 of the people on the train, including Henry Choteau, or Choteau, however you pronounce it, from St. Louis. One of the top dignitaries, he was killed, and Man Butler was killed. So they were numbered among the 43 deaths from the train. And then after Man Butler left the academy to go teach at college level, it closed down because at roughly the same time Father Maxwell died and the school was broke, and they just said forget it, so they shut it down. So that then it ushers in the next phase of its life as a Christian Brothers school. So in 1817, after about 5 years of closure, the town thought they would try the school again. But they realized there's no point going to the U.S. government. They're broke. They didn't do anything. So this time around, they decided to go to France because they have really more allegiance with France at this point than the U.S. And at that moment, there was a guy named Bishop de Burgh, who everyone's probably heard of, who's also getting very, very involved in everything around here. He really liked the idea. So he appealed to the Vatican, and the Pope agreed to send a small contingency of people here to restart the school with the blessing of Louis XVIII. And Louis XVIII donated their ship tickets to get here. So Louis XVIII gave them the money to come to America, but the Pope directed them to come on over to St. Genevieve. And this group became known as the Christian Brothers. And when they ultimately ended up at the academy, well, what had happened is it was the first Christian Brothers school in North America. So that's its next first in American history. So it started out first public school, first hanging, and then the first Christian Brothers school in North America. And so the three monks that arrived, it was brothers Antonin, Fulgence, and Aubin, they all arrived in 1818. And they came to be known as the Christian Brothers. And they did a terrific job. I mean, under the Christian Brothers, the school absolutely flourished. So they had it all figured out. And they also offered counseling to anyone in St. Gen who was having bad times, marital crisis, financial problems. You would go over to our house, and there was a staircase down, and there was a bell on the door, and you would ring the bell 24 hours a day, and the Christian Brothers, one of them would wake up and usher you into this little discussion area and talk about your problem. So they were not only teaching by day, they were teaching by day, counseling by night. Town loved it, everyone loved it, it was going great. And then they screwed up, the town screwed up. So they had promised when they got these brothers together that they would not separate them, because the Pope thought that they needed to keep these guys who had never been around anything other than what do you call it here, seminary, wherever you call where the monks were, that they would get corrupted because they hadn't been around liquor, gambling, any of this stuff, no vices. But he thought if you kept them together, they would be fine, and they were, as long as they were together. But people got jealous that St. Gen had this great school, and other places didn't have a great school. So they ultimately convinced them to split them up so that instead of having one great school, they could have 3 good schools. And that was a terrible mistake. So when they split them up, one became a farmer, and one became a riverboat gambler, and one became a very successful riverboat owner. So the most interesting of the 3 in the end was Brother Fulgence, because when Brother Fulgence died, he lived ultimately up near New York somewhere, and he owned a fleet of ships. So when he died, no one knew much about him. They were like, he was very quiet, kept to himself. So they went through his stuff to figure out what he owned or what to do, and he had very neatly arranged it in a box that he donated everything back to the Christian Brothers, all of the ships, all of his cash, under the condition that they admit that he never really left the order, because the order was to always help the poor. So his theory was, even though he'd fallen out of the order, that by helping the poor, that he was back in again. So, and I don't really know what happened to him after that, I don't know where he was buried or anything. So then we move on from the Christian Brothers to General Rozier. So what happened was, General Rozier was born in St. Genevieve in about 1820, and he's one of the sons of Ferdinand Rozier, which I think everyone knows who Ferdinand Rozier was. He was a big town merchant. And he's called General Rozier because he was a general in the Missouri militia. People always think he was a Civil War general. He was not a Civil War general. He was a general in the Missouri militia, which he attained that rank in 1845. So at that point, he was only 25 years old. So apparently it was a lot of advancement in the Army back then, because you could rise to general at the age of 25. But of course, people didn't live real long back then. Beyond being a general in the Missouri militia, he was also a banker, and he was an attorney, and he was an investor. He was one of the lead investors in the Plank Road, which is the road that goes from Ironton to St. Genevieve, which there's materials on right here in the museum. And in fact, he was so heavily into the Plank Road that his daughter married the engineer of the Plank Road, who was called Mr. Miller, and then she moved to Newport, Rhode Island. So he was really into it. She got married in the Art of the Academy. That's where their marriage was. Rozier also had several boys, and they needed schooling. And back then, they would often send you to a boarding school or something. And Ferdinand Rozier was doing great in commerce, and Furman was doing great with his law career and everything else. So he wanted to really elevate these kids' education, but he didn't really want to send them to a faraway boarding school. So he suddenly hatched this idea. The academy had been sitting vacant since the Christian Brothers broke up in like 1822 or something. So he had this idea, he would buy the thing, and then he would add a wing on it and make it into a very upscale boys' boarding school. But that way his kids could go locally. So they would be home every night, but everyone else would mostly be boarders, although they did have some other students from locally from St. Genevieve. And he knew that to make it work, when he ran the numbers, he'd have to double the size. So we built a second wing, equal size to the original. And that's why when you look at the house, you see the stone portion and then the brick portion. The brick portion was the 1854 wing that was built to make it into the boys' boarding school. And so in 1854, he opened it up with himself as headmaster, and it just completely sold out. It was hugely successful. Apparently there was massive demand from people all up and down the river who wanted their kids to go to boarding school here in the Midwest and not in New England or far away. And he had a library in the academy from which he wrote his own book. Ned Butler wrote a book, and he had to write a book. His is called The History of the Early Settlement of the Mississippi Valley, which is also a really great book. You can still buy it. They still print it. So you can just get a copy on Amazon or A-Books, wherever you want to go. But then the boarding school was doing terrific, and then in 1861 the Civil War breaks out. And he's in a quandary. What does he do? Because he's got all these kids from up and down the river. The northern ones would be in the Union, southern ones would be in the Confederacy. Is he going to be stuck with them forever? I mean, at this point he's getting old, or older, and his kids are getting older. So he decides to hedge his bets and to just literally take them down and send them all home. So he puts them all on the next available ship to the south or to the north, and that's the end of the school. And then he decides to go ahead and retrofit the school into his own house. And in fact, everyone in the family who did not marry ended up living and dying in the house. So he had 2 daughters who both became nuns. They died in the house. And when I say died in the house, didn't necessarily die in the house, maybe in the hospital or something. But the last guy who lived there was his son Tom, and Tom died in 1935. And so that's the point at which the Rozier story kind of ends and segues into its next chapter. But Rozier, he had one more brush with fame. He was general in Missouri militia, but another thing that made him famous locally was he owned the bank that on May 27, 1873 was robbed by, we believe, Jesse James, right? So I think they exclaimed hooray for Hildebrand when they robbed it, but they did that as a distraction from the fact that it was Jesse James' gang. And in our little museum in the house, I have a copy of a book that no one else apparently has ever been able to obtain, so the National Park Service borrowed it and copied it. And I found it on eBay, and it was like a dime store novel of Rozier and Jesse James' big gunfight, which never existed. So in the book, he robbed his bank, and he's super mad, and he gets a bunch of guys together on horses, and they chase after Jesse James. They have multiple shootouts, and then they realize, oh, it's just not worth it anymore, and they let Jesse James go. They're supposed to get him. They never chased, to my knowledge, Jesse James at all. Rozier, I'm certain, was never in a gun battle at all. But that was his final item. And his law office is now Sarah's Ice Cream. So his law office continues to provide good products. So Furman died at the Academy in 1897. He didn't make it to the next century. And Rozier's mentor, pretty much through his entire life, was Thomas Hart Benton, the same guy that caused the Gasconade Bridge collapse and all other kind of items. But he was trying to mentor Rozier to have a life in politics. And if you go to our house, well, you'll see in a minute, I have a picture of it, you'll see here is this massive and expensive engraving he had made, and what is it is Rozier and Benton in his yard. So he and Benton were joined at the hip for a period of years, and it almost worked, because Rozier ran for Congress in 1850, but he lost by a fairly narrow margin. So then he never tried again after that, but he did become mayor of St. Genevieve in 1851, and then he got elected to the Missouri State Senate in 1872. So he did do a little politicking, but he did not make it to Congress like he hoped. So now we'll move on to the St. Genevieve Academy. So when Rozier created what he thought would be this elite private boys' school, to make it elite, he went over and hired 4 teachers from England. And they now live in your house, our new from Hawaii neighbors, right in the audience. That's where they lived. And if you look at the programs of the school back in its heyday, the way they worked is they kept no grades. We have the actual books from the school. They donated them to us. And in the books, which are the official records of the Academy Boys School, all they tracked was how much money you owed and what you ate. That was it. There were no grades in it at all. So it's like it tracks every piece of cabbage you ate, and whether you were 2 cents short on your tuition payment, but we have no idea what the grades were. So apparently what they did is they would have an annual, or maybe more recent than annual, oral presentation where the kids would come in and they would ask them questions. They say, what's 2 times 2? If the kid said 5, then the parents might not come back the next year. But if the kid did well, then they'd come back, and to make it extra classy, they would then have a play. The play was typically another language. It would be in French. They did one year, it was in Latin. So it was a very elaborate thing that they would do. But we still have the records of it all, if anyone wants to see who went there and what they did. I don't know that the kids will be. It's really hard to read the writing back then. So at some point we need to take the books and figure out who all these kids were and their names and trace them back. But just thumbing through it, I don't know of any of them historically myself at all. So it's also interesting to note that Rozier set the tuition incredibly high, because he was trying to set it so high that it seemed a very exclusive school. So consequently, locally, the only ones who could afford to go there were mostly Rozier kids. So you had this really great school, but no one locally could afford to go to it. And so people came in from all together. There were people here from Memphis, New Orleans, and anywhere kind of in the South or the Midwest, they would go to it. Now this drawing which we have in the house, this is an etching, although what we have is not the original. I think it was copied from one in the Missouri History Museum or somewhere. This is Rozier, the tall guy. Rozier's very tall. And this is Thomas Hart Benton, the statesman here. And these are all Rozier people, Rozier kids. We don't know who, none of it was marked. The interesting takeaway from here is that there's no trees. It's been completely deforested because they needed all that lumber to either burn in the winter or to build buildings out of. So there's no trees at all. It looks like a desert. And also you can see the river. Well, you can't because this is cut off. But in the etching, the river comes up. The ships are mooring at Washington Street and Main. So apparently they would moor there. In fact, you can't see this, but well, you can see here's one carriage coming up. There's a whole bunch of carriages coming up from Washington and Maine, kind of where Stella and Me is located. It appeared to be kind of where they would land. And then they would come straight up here. But the guy did a terrific job. This is a guy named Conrad Rodner from Germany that he paid to have come in and do this. This was the front piece of his whole Come to the Academy sales brochure, is what he was doing there. Now, the school closed, again, with the Civil War in 1861, and that means that it was only open for 7 years. But unbelievably, 7 years was the longest run they ever had. So think about that for a minute. So we all know it as a school, but as a school it only ran for a couple years, and then it ran for 4 years, and then it ran for 7. So it was the Rozier family home for 74 straight years. So it was really more of a house than it ever really was a school based on the time, but of course the school is what makes it more notable. So from there we move on to John James Audubon and his connection with the house. So Audubon was General Rozier's father, Ferdinand Rozier's business partner. He may have come to the speech that people gave on Audubon and his involvement in town. And of course he arrived with Rozier's dad, and they had grand visions, but he wasn't very good at business. So Ferdinand Rozier was very good at business, but Audubon just preferred to basically draw things. He was a naturalist. And the way he would draw things, he would go out and shoot them, and then stuff them, and then he would draw them. That's why his things are more realistic than most people who try to take a fleeting moment of something run by and then try and draw it. He would very elaborately stuff them to do it. And there's two things we know about as far as Audubon and the Academy. One is he must have seen it, because they built the thing in 1808 and he was here in 1820. So he saw the Academy. Might have been in the yard, who knows? Might have shot an animal in the yard when it was abandoned. I have no idea. But the other thing he's known for is that, and we don't know the connection. No one really knows the full connection, but there were stuffed birds in the Academy, and there was a case of them, which is now here in the museum, which you can go see in the room in there. That used to be in the foyer of our house, and the case we think was built by Tom, who's the guy that died in 1935, because he was a painter, right? And did a pretty good job. You look at the case; it was pretty well painted. But at any rate, there were other odds and ends birds that were not in that case that were just left in bookshelves and stuff. So Mike Stewart, who is no longer with us, he told me that when the school bought the property in 1935, they took all those rotting birds and they burned them in the yard. So that was the end of the ones that didn't make the case, is they didn't know what to do with them because they were apparently pretty gross. But that's the other thing, is that this other part of the association is that it was also the funereal cremation spot of the other birds that didn't make the case, basically. All right, and so a lot of the house also is still around over in the late James Rozier's basement here in town. And I went over there and saw part of it, the mantle off, the clock off the mantle, most of the living room furniture, the sampler that was sewn up in my daughter's bedroom, all of that is still in existence. So little pieces of the house are still floating around, which just recently we got a call from a woman who was, what were they, 93 or something?
She was 97. The woman in the nursing home was 97.
97. So
And
we get a call
her
from a
daughter.
woman, from the daughter of a woman going into a nursing home at 97, calls us and says, we have 2 of your chairs, and we want to get them back to the Academy, because we're like breaking up housekeeping, for this 97-year-old woman, and what
Her
it is.
parents were architects, and
Right.
they came here in 1936, I believe.
Yeah, they were architects who came here with a WPA, and apparently when Tom Roger died in 1935, they had an estate sale. So her parents bought these 2 chairs, and they carried them with them when she was a little kid, and then when they died, she took the chairs. And so after, 80, 90-year absence, they're now back in the house again. So parts of the house still are roaming around. So then we move on to Tim Conley. Now, Tim Conley was the guy that basically saved the house from near utter destruction. So, General Rozier is the one who brought it back to life after it was abandoned for a few decades to make the boys' school. Tim Conley was the guy who in 1995 brought it back from probably future demolition because it was really, really bad condition. I've seen the pictures of it. The balconies had collapsed off the building. Windows were covered in plywood. It was rough. And I don't know the whole story of Tim Conley. He grew up in Ladue, and he was the guy that started the whole restoration of Lafayette Square back in at the age of 21. And I know he wrote a book, I have a copy of the book. And the first time I talked to Tim was around 2006, because the house has this never-ending story. You can call it a ghost story or whatever you want. But you hear kids running and jumping on the floors, which you hear when you're in the lower level. Pretty common occurrence. Eddie, would you agree? Yeah, would you agree? And so I called Tim Conley to say, hey, did you ever have anything weird? And he's like, oh, let me guess, it's just the kids jumping on the floor story. Yeah, I had the same thing. So anyway, so we started talking to Tim periodically, and he was always very helpful with us as far as things, questions on the academy, things to do with it. And then, of course, Tim bought the John Baptiste Valley house here, and then he restored that. And then he restored your house, right across the street from us. And he also tried to help us with things inside of our house. So when he moved out of the John Baptiste Valley house, he had a giant dining table, which he was desperate to find a home, because it was David Francis, the governor of Missouri's table, that he apparently had sought after his entire antique buying life, and it had finally got it. And so he ended up selling that back to us to go back in the dining room. He also made sure we had a 19th century riverboat table that he had collected, and then other items that he felt needed to be in the house. So he kept helping out the old academy basically forever. And he was not afraid to take on some pretty radically difficult restorations. I think that was his key. He didn't do just the garden variety needle paint. He would take on these terrible structural catastrophes and bring them back to life. So we drove him when he won the Missouri Lifetime Preservation Award during COVID. We were the ones who took him down there to pick up the award. So he did ultimately receive some renown for what he did in the end.
With the governor.
With the governor. And once he got restorations done, though, he got bored, and then he would move on to the next project. So that was kind of his thing. So he didn't just do one and quit. He just would jump about doing it. If he was still alive, he probably would be restoring more stuff. That was kind of his thing. All right. So now we're going to move to items on the inside of the house. First item here is a portrait of Soulard and his wife. So Soulard's wife is named Julia, and Julia Soulard was related to the Menards over in Illinois. If you ever go to the Menards house, which is across the river down, she was the sister of either the sister or daughter of Menard. I'm not sure the exact connection, but. At any rate, so we had the only known portraits. How did we get them? They were at auction in St. Louis, and nobody wanted them. I don't know what the deal was, but we ended up with the Soulards. And then we also have this George Caleb Bingham painting of August Choteau Jr., which we bought from the Campbell House Museum, which they were selling at auction because they didn't want it anymore because they didn't want to restore it. It was in nothing but tattered strips about ½ inch wide, so it looked like a bunch of fringe in a gold frame, and so we had it restored, and then when we got done, it turned out it was Choteau's portrait. So that's how we ended up with the George Caleb Bingham painting. And then we have a painting of Emily Berthold, who was another relation to Choteau, and that was Emmanuel de Franca. He was actually the main competitor for Bingham for portraiture. And then we have this interesting painting, or maybe we don't. There we go. Yeah, we have the only known portrait of Benjamin Franklin Coons, and you might say, who in the world is that? This was a guy born in St. Louis in 1826 who founded El Paso in 1847. So that's why the mountains in El Paso are called the Franklin Mountains. It's after Benjamin Franklin Coons. So we have that portrait, and kind of like Stephen F. Austin was known as the father of Texas. This guy was the father of El Paso. That was his claim to fame. And the way we got that was he had that painting for I don't know how long, 100 years or something, on a lease agreement with a family out of Illinois that they got it back. And I guess the museum never thought they would actually do it, but they somehow kept track of it. And then when it came up the date, they took it from the museum and then sold it at auction, which is really, really odd. We also have a coat from Versailles. This is a jacket from 1780. We got that at an auction of unusual costumes, because how often you see a jacket from Versailles? Not very often. This is our most notable item. We have a piece of Lincoln's shirt from when he was assassinated. Now you might say, how the heck did you get that thing? Well, when Lincoln was assassinated, they took his tuxedo off, and it's in the Smithsonian. But they had to cut the shirt off, and when they cut the shirt off, someone in his cabinet took the shirt. And then they cut it into squares, and they gave it to everybody in the cabinet. So our piece came from Bam Forsyth, who was the official surveyor of the United States during that period. So that was his, which became his own little pocket locket thing. And so that's where that thing came from. We also have the famous quarter cabinet from the Jean-Baptiste Valley house. Tim Colley wanted us to keep that in a safe place, so we kept it in our upper bedroom. But that's where it's at this point. So and that room was actually originally his library, Roger's library. So it kind of all ties together yet again. So the bottom line is that it's been our honor to be the stewards of the property since about 2005, and we appreciate you taking the time to hear a little of the story. And now I'll answer any questions if you have any questions at all.
I don't have any questions, but I was brought up next to or in the neighborhood of this.
Okay.
I lived right down the street. When we were kids, we played hide and go seek up there all the time. With all the trees and stuff up there.
Yeah.
And of course, back then we didn't have to worry about being out at nighttime or in the evening. But whenever we were growing up, like the superintendents of that taught at the school, they lived in that house.
That's right. Yeah. The way it went from when Roger died in 35,
Right.
He sold it to the school district.
Right.
Then they made it the superintendent's house.
Right.
But it was more than just that. They cut it into several units. So there was a superintendent. I think the first one who lived there was who people have the basketball tournament. Help me out. What's the name of the basketball tournament?
Tommy.
He wasn't the first
I can't remember the name. It's Dodgers and Players. It's the name of the tournament. I think it was that guy. But I've had multiple people over the years who will come to our house and say, hi, can I come and look at the house because I lived there back, when my parent worked at the school.
Yeah.
So it went from that to the Foundation for Restoration, from Foundation to the state of Missouri. State of Missouri, it went to Tim Conley. From Tim Conley, believe it or not, it went to DePaul University under a straw buyer, which was the guy that had the Tiger Sanctuary, who was a DePaul graduate. The school wanted to have a surprise announcement. They were building an American Studies campus. So they had him buy it in his name for DePaul, and then the guy with the grand idea of doing this, he got fired. And then the school is now embarrassing the school that they screwed up and let this guy go crazy. So then he then sold it to us. So that was the progression of where it went. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, sorry. Well,
I noticed one of the earlier pictures or paintings showed the river in the background. So before the river shifted, I suppose it was right
yeah,
there.
before the river shifted, according to the etching in our house, it docked at Stella and me.
Yeah.
You could have lunch and then step on the riverboat based on
It was a
the
saloon.
drawing that we had. Yeah, so
The river
it
changed in 1880.
Yeah, it did a big shift in 1880. But yeah, prior to that was one of the attractions I think for Rozier on the location was the kids could come in, and then it was very safe because it wasn't like I don't know, Arrow Rock, where you have to go in the middle of nowhere, and, you know, but you could just really take the river, step off, get on a carriage, and go straight to the house.
Conrad Gravert was the guy that painted that 1850s.
Correct.
He actually married a St. Genevieve girl, Agatha Greither. And
No one knows more about our history than Bob.
but he went all over the area. I mean, I see paintings of his up in Illinois that he would do.
Yeah, and he was really good.
Yeah.
Really good at what he did. Yes.
Just a comment related to Jesse James. There was a gentleman who lived here, his name was Edgar Beck. He owned the house in the middle of the block between Merchant and Market Street on the east side. The house still stands, his daughter owns it, as I understand it. He told me one time, he says, there's this question about whether Jesse James really robbed that bank, and whether it's Jesse James or not. He says, but if you go back in Holmes Cave and go back there far enough, you'll see Jesse James etchings. He wrote it in there when they wrote out of town. They went into Combs Cave. Combs Cave would be like as you're going out 32 towards the community center.
Right?
Citizens Electric has a substation right there on the left. And back in those woods is the entrance to Combs Cave. I've been in Combs Cave before, but I've never been back far enough to see Jesse James.
There's a story I've never heard. Okay. I'll go check it out. All right. Any other questions?
So what was your reason for wanting to buy the Academy? Was it the rich history of it? Or?
Well, we're history buffs, but also my wife is from Percy, Illinois, right across the river. And she used to go over to the house with her father and look at it back in the day.
All right.
So it just seemed like a good all-around thing to do, to buy that. And we lived in Dallas, so we were looking for more of a small town environment to raise our daughter in, so just all tied together. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you have any other type of experiences other than kids trying to?
Oh, yes, do we ever? Let's see, what variety
And
do you
I have
want?
to tell you, one night, I woke up in the middle of the night, I said, what is that noise? He said, does it sound like children running across a porch? I said, yes. He said, I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
You know? So, or you'll be sitting in the dining room, all of a sudden a door will open, or a door will shut, you know, it's just like really weird stuff.
Yeah, strange.
happens all- And I'm not making this stuff up.
Yeah,
We have these ghost people, national ghost people, they always come to our house. We've never done that because of our daughter, and we just don't want to mess with it, because we're just not going to mess with it. Okay?
Well, we've had the orbs of light going up and down the staircase, we've had that happen. We've had the kids jumping on the floors. We've had Rozier walking into rooms in your peripheral vision. We've had 3 different people who have had that experience, myself.
Nikki
one of them.
Keddy was one. She said, oh yes, we saw the ghost. You know, she hosted an event at my home recently, but another
Then
one.
we had a man made of smoke in the yard when we put in our pool, so I have a guy from the pool place as a witness on that one. So most of them are hard to define, but at the same time, they're never scary. I mean, our ghosts at the Academy are Casper the Friendly Ghost. There's no negativity, it's like they're just there to say howdy, so it's not spooky ghost. So we don't mind it too much, we've gotten used to it.
But it has happened, and like we were watching television one night in our media room downstairs, and all of a sudden we heard somebody walking upstairs, and Frank gets his loaded gun, you know.
That was sounded a little too legit.
I mean,
We
he
heard
looks
something
around,
go
and then he comes back
all the
and
way
says,
from our kitchen
oh, I just think
above
it was
us
the
down.
general checking out of his home. That's what I said, you know.
So that was pretty recently, so it really does that.
You've ruled out squirrels, right?
There's no way squirrels, unless they were really creative squirrels, like Guardians of the Galaxy raccoon style. Maybe it's possible. Any other questions? Yes.
Wasn't this building the school for the blind also?
No, there were, you know, the school that's on Washington Street near Maine, which some people call the first school, that was not the first public school, but Bob, which first school was it? That was the first one.
Well, the first school, we're trying to figure out exactly, it was over on Gabarty, because in I can't remember the date, about 1850, they put a for sale ad in the paper, and it might have been where the secretary house was. There were the old fancy
On that corner?
Yeah,
You mean?
yeah.
Oh.
But the first school was the first one built by the board of directors of public schools in St. Genevieve.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's called Percy.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes.
Back in, went to school up there in 54 or 58, and at that time, the teachers, some of the teachers rented in that building.
Oh, yeah, no, it was subdivided into 3 or 4 units as housing for teachers and the superintendent. And we've had many people come in, and they can walk you through and tell you where every wall was and everything. We would admit, oh, it's Mrs. Thomas, that's what I was thinking of. She
Mrs. Thomas,
she came by one time. I think she was the first one in there, I could be wrong.
No, she was one of, her husband, I think, was superintendent.
He was.
Yes,
Yeah, I don't
She
know
was
what year.
very lovely.
I thought there was somebody, another superintendent before him.
It could have been.
But
We're-
it
But I know
Yeah.
she lived there, and there was 2 other families that lived there at the same time.
Yeah, well, one item which I can't figure out, and I don't know if Bob can even, but we have a magazine from the railroad. The railroad, back in the 1930s, printed a magazine for railroad employees. So I bought a copy on eBay because our house was on the cover. But there was a magazine that had just little 1 or 2 page little ditties in it. But the writer says that, you know, it's great visiting a historic site and hearing the sound of golf balls being hit constantly in the golf course in front of the house. Was there a public course at one time, Bob, or something going
There
through
have
there?
been several ones. I think there was one out in Little Rock Road at one time.
Okay, so the writer wasn't crazy, because they wrote a whole sentence or 2 on the
And then there was one
golf
out
course.
on Market Street.
Really? Okay, I
There
didn't
was
know
a
that.
miniature golf course down on Merchant.
I did not know that. Yeah, I never understood how there were a golf course in front of our house. Any other questions? I'm not here to hold you hostage, just answer questions. Yes.
What would you say is like the coolest part about owning the house? Place, like the history, the architecture?
The coolest part about owning the house is, I mean, we're history buffs, so the history is a big number 1. Because it's always fun thinking like, who else was in here and what happened? Because there were so many people there over so many years that you just can't imagine, you know, what there is and then what you don't know. I also have fun finding stuff like in the yard and things like that. It's amazing how much St. Genevieve history is actually underground at this point. And sometimes when it rains or something, you'll pop up stuff. We popped up a sterling silver spoon in the yard. We popped up a whole bunch of different china pieces, you know, broken plates, things like that. So it's got a wide range of stuff. So it's just got every day's kind of new and different. It's just kind of fun being there. Yes.
How many rooms are in that house?
Oh man, it's
27.
27 rooms.
So like the layout, like.
The layout of the house is you've got on this side right now we have a music room and a living room and then a giant dining room thing and then a kitchen and we got a bedroom and a bedroom
And foyers.
and another and foyers, another bedroom. See, the other part of the house people don't realize is, which was the piece that Tim never wanted to jack with, because Tim only lived there on the weekends. He didn't really have working water sewer. It was a joke. The sewer line was severed under the school's parking lot, so he could only like take a shower or something a limited amount before he back up into the house, which he knew from memory. And then by the time he come out the next time, it would have all slowly, like a septic system, drained into the parking lot. But the lower level, he never touched. And he, in fact, there was one room down there, he's like, don't even jack with that room, it's so bad. Because he could not even get the water out of it. The water was standing in like this, and it was just completely shot. But we were able to stop the flow of water and then get the water out. And we thought it was a dirt floor, but underneath the mud was bricks. So we're the ones that did the whole lower level. When we bought it, the staircase was only held up by 2 2x4s. Right? It was just a terrifying mess of a
Robert
thing.
Schultz.
Yeah, Robert Schultz, the brother of Carl, right back there. He's the guy that came in and totally redid that crazy thing and brought it back to life. Most people don't realize it's actually effectively a 3-story house. It has full ceiling height, not as tall as these floors, but it's what, 8
feet.
8 feet on those levels, it's 10 feet on the others. So that's the part most people miss out. And also I don't know what the deal was, but when they built the house, it was only 4 feet from ground to that. But today, it's almost like the house is sunk a little or something weird happened because it's seemingly we're farther in the ground than we used to be. Yes.
Back in 1836, one of the travel writers that came through here referred to that, your building, and called it a haunted house up on the hill.
Yeah.
Because it was empty at the time.
And it's haunted.
And
The other thing that gave it a bad rap, there was a coffin.
Even Ouija boards and stuff.
Yeah, there was a coffin in the attic that the drama club had put up there apparently at one point. And so for a lot of people, that was a real coffin. So at some point, they pulled the coffin out of the attic. And so the rumors got around that, like there was coffins in the attic. But the other part that spooked people, which is still a problem in the area, are bats. Because a lot of bats have moved into the academy. We had so much guano in some of those abandoned chimneys that, Robert Schultz took out a ton of, it was a freaking pickup truck full of guano out of one chimney. So we had a lot of bats, and even today, you encounter, if you go out there at night with any light source, you're gonna get buzzed by a bat, which is not really a great idea. I think when we redid the house, they mostly moved over to the school and kind of hang out over there now. But I think that also gave it kind of a haunted between the coffin and the bats. And just the creepiness of when it was abandoned with the plywood over the windows and the balconies falling off. Just kind of scared people. Yes.
First, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I remember vividly from when Dad was working on the house, that a very wide wooden door in the lower level of your house.
Yep.
And I always wondered, did that have a...
We now know the answer of why it is that wide wooden door. So interesting you should say that. We got a call one day from the people, there's a museum of the Christian Brothers up in New York City. And they wanted to send a lady down because they were going to do an exhibit in the Christian Brothers Museum in New York City on its early origins on the Academy. Well, they have most of the Academy's stuff in that museum, kept in boxes that they won't let anyone see. So it's kind of bizarre. So I asked them if we could have any piece of it. No, you can't have any piece. I said, it's in a closet. And they were like, yeah, well, it's got to stay in the closet. Got to keep it around. But they came down, and when we bought the house, we thought that the thing that those big doors opened onto was a pantry, because that's how Tim Conley had it. He had potted plants out there because he hated the lower level. He just literally, in the winter, he put plants down there so they wouldn't freeze to death. That was all he did down there. But that was apparently a landing. There's a staircase which is buried. It's still there. And the staircase goes down to that level, and there on the wall was the bell that you rang to get the brothers. So that's why they put all that money in those doors. So those are the original cypress doors, still there, which they have the key to, still there. But that was their grand meeting area for the town. So that was the after hours deal. So that's why they put all that money in those big doors. So you're exactly correct, and they're still there. Yeah. Yes.
A question for you and Annette. What do you see as your legacy with the Academy? Whenever 100 years from now, whenever this presentation is happening in this room, do you want to be remembered as a ghost?
When we first moved here, we would get like all these artifacts. People from our community, our beautiful community, would bring these artifacts to put in this little museum that Frank, my husband, designed in the basement, or the lower level, close to the lower level. And they say, well, you have a 100-year loan on it as long as your family never leaves. And that's what they would tell us. So Frank, you
Yeah, so basically our goal is for our daughter and her descendants to keep living there and doing stuff with it. So we'll see how well that plays out. That's about or just like a caretaker, as was Tim Conley, really everyone before that. Even when I talk to people who actually, there were a few people there, and the one that told me the story has since died because she was close to 100. But Tom Rozier, when he lived there, well, number one, he never electrified it. So he was in 1935 with that electricity. I mean, by 35, you normally would have it. But he ran it just like his dad had. And he liked to go downtown, they said, on a wagon wearing his dad's Missouri militia uniform. So he liked being this kind of odd thing out of the 1850s and 1930 around town. But he was also kind of a caretaker. I mean, he painted it, fixed stuff. His two sisters that lived there who were nuns, they did it. So it's basically, it's just a story, kind of lifetime maintenance, is kind of the
It's kind of like,
thing.
say, I grew up in Randolph County, Illinois, and there's a house on State Street over in Chester, this huge mansion. The families actually lived there for 120 years, but they no longer live there. They mostly live in Philadelphia, but they still own it, and they have caretakers on the land. My cousin is actually, he's retired, and he and his wife live in one of the guest houses, and then they rent the other ones out. And so we don't have guest houses, things. This wasn't built like that. It was historic, okay? But the family has owned it for since the turn of last century. The man owned multiple coal mines in southern Illinois, and they all live in Philadelphia now. And that's not my goal, that my daughter lives in some other state, but she'll probably live in the St. Louis area. But our goal is that it stays in our family, and we can hand it down to other generations and preserve its beautiful history and keep it historical. And that is the absolute goal.
Yeah, and also don't forget, it is deed restricted by the state of Missouri, so you're not allowed to make it into a B&B. You can't add rooms, you can't add bathrooms, you can't touch the thing. All you're allowed to do is paint it, so.
Yeah,
it has
somebody
zero
asked me
risk of
recently,
being
somebody asked me
any
recently,
other-
oh, does it bother you, just can't rip out all the walls and make it modern? I said, not really. Because that was never my goal, never. It's a historical property, it's like people come in and they say, this is like a museum, we live here. Yeah, do you like it? We love it. You know, and it's our home, and that's what we understand to be correct. And as we've taught our daughter, and hopefully that's what our descendants will be taught also.
Any other questions?
Did you ever open that safe?
Sorry?
Did you ever get that safe open?
Oh, it was a story of the safe. So the guy said that he locked it, stole the key, and it was completely closed shut. So we're like, darn it. So I then thought, well, how can I get in the safe? Can I get a locksmith? Well, apparently those old safes, you can't pick the lock. You have to forge a key for every combination. When no one's ever going to spend the money to forge every key. So there was no hope. One guy said, oh, we'll just take it out of the field here in St. Jen and put a dynamite stick to find out what's inside. I said, well, but that would ruin the safe, and what if there's nothing in it? So we just decided we'd take it downstairs. So good old Robert Schultz, he has an idea. We were trying to transport it from the kitchen. Unbelievably, this safe, which weighed 700-800 pounds, I don't know, 1,000, sitting there. If you imagine how much weight are on the feet of that safe, I mean, it's, I don't know, like 10,000 pounds per square inch, is some crazy thing. And I thought it would just go through the floor. Like, I don't know why it had not already gone through the floor. So we have to get it from there down the floor. So how do you do that? How do you get a 1,000-pound block of metal, which you can't take the door off because it's locked, down? So Robert Schultz has this idea that he stole from the Egyptians, that he would take two long poles, of like 2x6s, and we would strap it with like 4 or 5 people on each side to lift it, and then they would Egyptian-style carry it down the staircase. Well, you can guess what happened on that. They started to go down the staircase, and one guy lost his footing. The next thing, the whole thing just went, right? So it just went bamity bam down. But fortunately, the stone stairs that go down to the lower level from the outside of the house. And when it hit the bottom, the door swung open. So the guy thought he had locked it and stole the key. He had unlocked it, stolen the key, and then it had just with corrosion had sealed itself shut. So we were in it, and guess what was inside of it after all that effort? Absolutely nothing. Remember the show where they got into Al Capone's safe with Geraldo Rivera? They were all excited, but nothing in it. It was a huge disappointment. Okay, looks like I'm out of time, so.
Thanks so much to Frank and Annette Rolfe for a great presentation. So many takeaways on there, the stone from Fort de Chard and so many things. Fascinating, really. And be sure and thank ABC anyone from Marsupial Electric, our sponsor for tonight's presentation. So again, thank you.